our son came into the bedroom, and instantly we knew something was wrong based on the look on his face. And he started crying. He had his phone in his hand, and he just said, "My life is over." And so we asked what was wrong, and it took a few minutes. He was so scared and I think shocked by the whole thing that had transpired that he couldn't get the words out. And so after a few minutes, he was able to tell us that he was being threatened on social media. A day before, he had gotten a friend request on Instagram, and it was a friend request just from someone that he didn't know, and he accepted that. And the person appeared to be a 14-year-old teenager, and they were just talking back and forth, building a rapport together, and that basic relationship online. And she asked if he wanted to have some fun, and he said yes. And she at that time said, "Well, let's take it over to Snapchat." The conversation ended up leading into them asking him to take pictures of himself. And after looking at the messages myself, what was scary from a parent's perspective is how they were very, very skilled at getting him to do exactly what they wanted. And we have had conversations at our house, and even with those conversations, it was a learning experience, just to know that I think even more frequent conversations, 1 or 2 conversations about what can happen, just isn't enough, because he thought, he's a 14-year-old boy, and they just knew exactly what to do to manipulate him into, when sexual things weren't on his mind, to steer the conversation in that direction. And so he ended up taking images of himself in exactly the way they instructed, which included images with his face in them. And once they got those images with his face in them, they then took photos of his friends online. They went on, because they had contacted him and friended him through a couple different social media networks, they were able to find him on several different social media sites, and they took images of all of his friends. So they identified who he was connected with through social media, and then sent him back the images that he had sent, of course, which were explicit images and included his face. So there was no way for him to deny that they had him exactly where they wanted him. And so once the conversation, they got those images, and the conversation shifted instantly. So it went from a really friendly and, I guess at that point, sexual conversation to a very threatening conversation. They instantly, the first piece was sending him those images of himself and of his friends, so he knew instantly what they could do. And they made it very clear that they wanted to ruin his life, and they had no issue doing that. And to a 14-year-old, when you're sending very personal images of yourself to all of your friends, and they knew what school he went to. The first request was for $400. And his response was that, "I'm 14 years old. I don't have that kind of money." And of course, they then instructed him, I believe that they had instructed him that he could steal credit cards from, from his parents, from us. Where we were really thankful is that they threatened him. He said he didn't have that kind of money. He said he had a Dairy Queen gift card and that he had gotten for Christmas that had $10 and a $10 Target gift card, and he offered those to them, and they threatened his life at that time. So they threatened to kill him. He never sent any money. But at that point, they started calling his phone through Snapchat. You can call through Snapchat, which I learned. And there was further harassment through there. At first, anger, because it's my child, and he obviously, they're our first priority. Secondly, it was, how can we stop these images from going out? It was a little difficult to think because, again, these guys are skilled at what they do. It's all they do all day long. So for them, I'm one of probably thousands of people. We were able to get in touch with a law enforcement officer from the BCA, and they linked us up to a resource that's a rather new resource, and that essentially you can make it so you can mark the photos so that if they're loaded online through algorithms, they're instantly taken down. And so it was through the resources that law enforcement agencies put out there and the quick reaction from the law enforcement agencies and the agents that we got to work with, that within minutes, literally, we had the photos marked so they couldn't be posted online, and a case started, and agents were out within we were, as I mentioned, out of town, so the day we got back, I believe they were at our house taking statements and gathering the evidence off the phone, so we could move quickly so that those photos didn't get posted online, which would be absolutely traumatic. As if the situation wasn't already traumatic, but having those photos posted for a 14-year-old who's a 9th grade in high school, I can't imagine the devastating impact that that would have. We have worked really closely with the agents from the BCA, and they've been great at updating us. They sent subpoenas out immediately to get the information from those accounts that the criminals were using, and they were able to locate where they came from. And one thing that was really comforting to us is just because a criminal operates internationally doesn't mean that our federal law enforcement agencies don't pursue those cases. It doesn't mean that they always will, but they just because in our instance, the criminals were out of country in Africa, and they were able to pinpoint exactly where in Africa. So in this instance, they came out of Nigeria, and they are collaborating with other law enforcement agencies to try to prevent this from happening, which just to see the collaboration between the different law enforcement agencies and how quickly they collaborate and communicate with each other to put the victim first was, in our situation, just took a really scary situation and gave us such a peace of mind. Our son is not comfortable using social media at this time. It really traumatized him from using social media, and it really scared him. So I think it's made him a lot more skeptical of people. On a bright side, he understands that he learned a few lessons coming out of this. First and foremost, he learned that these things happen to anyone. It doesn't target a specific demographic, a geographic location, age range, race. There's no discrimination of who they will target. They just want the money, and it doesn't matter who it's from. I think communication is the most important thing, and making sure that you're communicating with your kids about social media and setting boundaries and educating them at the beginning, the time they start using social media. I would recommend to parents, before they get their first account, that conversation should take place about what can happen and what are the boundaries, and making sure that you're checking their accounts and staying on top of what they're doing. We learned that we thought we had boundaries in place, and we didn't. He was able to change some of the parental settings very easily, and we didn't know that. So he was on his phone when we thought the phone was a brick at night. And that is not the case. And I think as parents, we were just a little too trusting to think that, you set up some of these parental controls and it's going to monitor the situation for you. And as a parent, I have now learned I need to be actively involved in that phone on a regular basis if he's going to have access to those items, such as social media on his phone and the internet. And as I said, for communication, I think having a communication at the front end of when they start using it, and continuing that communication, because the conversations, if they're regular, they're not going to feel awkward. I would say there's more resources out there than what I knew about. And if you're unable to find those resources, there's law enforcement agencies that are more than eager and willing to provide and help you locate those resources.